Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum where all voices matter. W. Brett Wilson is a Canadian investment banker. He's an entrepreneur, an investor, and a philanthropist. In his many roles, he's supported the Alberta energy sector as well as startup entrepreneurs throughout Canada. He's agreed to a wide-ranging discussion, so welcome, Brett, to Boom and Bust.
Thank you for the opportunity, Tony. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure to discuss things with you as well, Brett, because you are someone who focuses in on not only your areas of expertise, but has a lot of views and opinions about our country. So what's annoying you these days? Let's start with that.
Well, Canada losing in the Olympics in a hockey game today, that was a little disappointing.
Yes.
But big picture, the real issue is how we're implementing a War Measures Act to deal with something that could have been negotiated with a handshake. And it's just the extremes of that just shudder the mind. It just makes no sense whatsoever.
Well, this is the thing, we've heard for many decades, I grew up with the notion that liberals and progressives were fighters for civil liberties, not against them. And now we're in this strange world where, because of the protests, I guess we're invoking emergencies legislation. So where do you see this ending?
Well, I go back to where it started. So where it started, in my opinion, was less about, the mandates were talked about, but it was really an anti-Trudeau movement that really picked up a groundswell of considerable momentum. And we saw it in terms of the convoy heading to Ottawa and the very dismissive comments from the Prime Minister about this fringe, irrelevant comment, as if anyone who disagrees with him has no right to be in Canada. And so I took my support for the convoy movement was predicated on the anti-Trudeau element of it, challenging the mistakes that had been made. I was a little disappointed when the decision was made at Coutts and at Windsor to block the park, to block, if you will, access going each way in terms of our national border. I had no issue with the protest. I had no issue with drawing attention to the fact that there was an issue, but I struggled a little bit with the economic input. So my comment is I support the protesters. I don't support blockades. I don't support riots. But what we've been doing with the convoy is probably the most peaceful of all interaction in terms of demonstration and presenting sort of the views of part of the population. And it was a lot more than the fringe in terms of part of the population. And so now my frustration in terms of where we're going from here, obviously the borders are opening. So very respectfully, and the legacy media, which has been challenging, has captured, there was a Confederate flag, there was a Nazi flag, there's a couple of guns. Someone made a mess of the Terry Fox memorial. Right. Again, those were a fraction of 1% of what the story was that was out there, and yet those became headlines. And that's always disappointing for me, that we weren't looking at the broad picture instead of narrow microcosms. And so where do we go from here? Well, the borders are opening, and obviously with the government having the War Measures Act in place, it'll be interesting to see. I think in 7 days' time, they have to put specifics in. Trudeau has already said that it's regional in nature, it's time limited in nature. The NDP absolutely refused to say what they said or what they think about the War Measures Act, but clearly Trudeau's expecting either the Bloc or the NDP to be in some way highly supportive of this effort. And so I'm struggling. The Liberals and the NDP are saying we're going to shut down the rights of a lot of individuals to do something reasonable. Did I like the horns honking all night long? No, that didn't make a lot of sense. But again, that got fixed, that got moderated. And, when you look at the extremes of the FLQ crisis in 74 versus the call it the horn honking in 2022, I think the government's grossly overreacting. It goes back to my first comment was a conversation would have gone a long way. And even if it wasn't Trudeau, it was Freeland or someone coming out to talk to people, show some respect. We're going the opposite here, this idea of the War Measures Act, and I refuse to call it anything but the War Measures Act. They can change the name, but the intention is the same.
Brett Wilson, we're having a great discussion with you. We are going to take a little bit of a break. I do want to get into topics like the oil and gas sector and corporate leadership in this country and how we're dealing with challenges like net zero. So stay tuned. Our guest will be back after these messages, and we'll be back as well. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Brett Wilson, obviously a storied investment banker, entrepreneur, investor, philanthropist, CEO and chairman of Prairie Merchant Corporation. Brett, I want to take us away from the goings-on in Ottawa and elsewhere politically, and it is an important topic. Civil liberties is not something we should stay away from it in discussing. But I do want to talk about our oil and gas sector a little bit as well. Can and should Canada save its oil and gas sector at this point?
Well, can and should, both are possible, both are probable, both are musts. Let's start with the big picture. We consume 3 million barrels a day as a country, and that's growing. That's growing with time. All due respect to the net zero movement, all the anti-fossil fuel movements, all those conversations, which are largely foreign funded, but we'll come back to that separately. But right now, a third of our oil comes from foreign countries. So we send close to $20 billion a year to foreign countries to cover their operating costs, to cover return of capital, to recover return on capital, and to cover profits. So we're sending $20 billion by choice because for some reason, we've made the decision we can't build pipelines inside Canada. Every other country in the world is exploding its infrastructure in terms of pipelines and the ability to deliver, whether it's LPG, liquefied propane, LNG, liquefied natural gas, or crude oil, or any of the constituents that come out of the refineries. The fact that every other country in the world has found a way to build pipelines, and we have some people who say we don't do no pipelines, and yet we bring oil down the St. Lawrence Seaway. So we have this hypocrisy of how we operate as a country. We could be energy self-sufficient if on a given day someone decided to shut down the pipeline traffic, which is the ships coming down the St. Lawrence. Canada would be stymied. We would be absolutely gobsmacked at how incompetent we are at substituting for the oil that comes down the St. Lawrence Seaway. So that's the big picture issue, is we should be energy self-sufficient. But we've got this group of people, foreign funded for the most part, whether it's Suzuki or Tides Foundation or Sierra Club or Greenpeace, doesn't matter. The names don't really matter. There's a group of them who've collectively said that the Canadian oil and gas industry must be shut down. Global demand dropped during COVID, right. And there was this degree of excitement that came out of Greenpeace saying, that hydrocarbons are done, they're over. No, that was never the case, and that was never the belief. Calgary is alive, it's doing well. The fact that it's 30% empty doesn't bother me overly because we've been building like crazy for the last 20 years. And the fact that a few landlords have some empty space, that doesn't really affect the economy. It affects a few landlords who are generally Toronto-based. I've got friends who own a bunch of buildings here. The fact that they don't have cash flow going back into Toronto doesn't bother me. What's happening in Alberta, the fact that oil prices are where they are, gas prices are where they are, future demand is where it is. Our First Nations are raising their hands saying, look, we're getting screwed and royally screwed by this anti-fossil fuel movement, whether it's the people who interfered with Coastal GasLink, the people who are attempting to demise or to limit the construction of TMX, and the TMX pipeline is basically following an existing pipeline route. So the fact that people think that we're undermining the environment, let alone the economy, with the TMX expansion. So again, First Nations are saying enough is enough. We want to be alive and well. And we've certainly got the same opportunity going. We're seeing it in every oil and gas company. And I'm still heavily invested in the energy sector because I believe in the people, I believe in the business. So I don't think that economically and without hypocrisy overwhelming it, we are going to continue to grow our Canadian oil and gas industry.
Yeah, just one point you raised about the foreign funding of the apocalyptic eco-terrorist and environmental movement. and no hue and cry about that. And yet, for the trucker protest, everybody's up in arms over foreign funding for that. So again, situational ethics abounds in this conversation, right?
Well, I was poking the former minister or former representative of the United States to Canada, the Bruce Hayman.
Bruce Hayman
was going on and on about how he felt it was so inappropriate for Americans to be funding this Confederate-based conspiracy in Canada. I'm going, just a minute. You've been undermining the Canadian economy, the Canadian oil and gas industry, the Canadian pipeline industry. You've been undermining that as a country led by, if you will, Obama. Obama was the one who shut down access to Canada for the pipeline. The day Trump got in, he said, let's go. And so we had some actually intelligent process. I mean, love or hate Trump doesn't matter. What he was trying to do in terms of rebuilding the economy and the connection to Canada was extraordinary. Biden on day one proved stupidity abounds in the White House.
And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Brett Wilson. Brett, you were mentioning about oil prices on the rise and its impact on the Alberta economy. Give us a little bit more of an insight. What's going on in world demand and how it's affecting Alberta?
Well, there's two or three levels. One is the fact that our oil sands, which is one of the major suppliers of crude oil to Canada, and therefore any of the shipping and whatnot that we do, used to be the high cost producer, but now it's, call it, middle of the road. It's actually a fairly economic in almost all oil price scenarios. Now, some of the other oil we've been producing, some of the oil that requires long lateral horizontal wells, is expensive. So a higher operating cost, but all of it's probably $30 to $40 a barrel at the outside. And so now as we're at 60 and 70 and 80 and 90 and $100 a barrel, and you're seeing some forecasts of 150 for next year. But let's call, if we were in the range of 80 to $100, we have the ability to reinvest actively, which is expansion of the oil sands, expansion of the laterals, the horizontals, expansion of actually discovery drilling, exploration drilling, where we're looking to find new pools. So the economics of everything have come back in place. The other thing that's happened in the oil and gas industry is it was grossly over-levered as an industry going into, call it the turn down, the meltdown of COVID. And so what's happening with most oil and gas companies is deleveraging and returning capital to the shareholders because they have excess cash flow right now. But the reinvestment opportunity is really, I'm seeing it left, right, and center in downtown Calgary. I call it Alberta, call it Saskatchewan, call it BC. I mean, we are the Canadian oil and gas industry in the West, and it's very robust. It's very encouraging. And the other thing is, it was very, very predictable. The thought that there was headlines that said the end of the oil and gas industry is nigh makes no sense at all. I mean, there's a guy in Ottawa who works with Trudeau, Stephen Guilbeault. Makes no sense at all. Some of the comments that he makes, some of the thinking he makes. I mean, I happen to believe that the expelling single-use plastics is one of the stupidest things we should be focusing on. Now, am I suggesting that plastics aren't to be recycled? No. The two issues we have on this planet are population, and allowing the population to expand in places that have no infrastructure doesn't make sense, but we're never going to have a conversation about limiting the growth of our populations. So that won't happen. So then we go to the second issue, which is pollution. And as long as you've got countries that are backing garbage trucks up to the ocean and dumping in, I mean, the odds of a plastic straw from Canada making it into the ocean, a fraction of 1% of the straws have ever made it into the ocean. It's the recycling. And we all know, we've heard the stories are legend. You separate your wastes, and then they all go to a dump and they get gathered again. They all get put back together. So the recycling, dealing with pollution, that's a core issue. And that's what we should be talking about, not the panic mode over whether your straw is plastic or paper. It's the recycling of everything we make. Single-use plastics occur in the medical industry. They occur, and again, whether it's single or multiple use, at some point, all plastics should be recycled. So we're misguided with a hypocrisy that says that the fossil fuel industry is causing waste in the pollution. Waste in the ocean. No, it's dumping waste in the ocean that causes the problem, not the production of it.
You mentioned just the reinvestments that are possible now with oil prices the way they are. But with corporate ESG goals the way they are, is that a problem for Alberta and Canada, that you're not getting the reinvestment you need because everybody's signed on to environmental, social, and governance goals that say they don't invest in the oil sector?
I'm struggling with that for sure. We've got alarmists asking the insurance industries to stop insuring the oil and gas industry. We've got hypocrisy at every level saying that we shouldn't be investing. So ESG's become a bit of a challenge. Do I believe that we should be looking at good governance and good environmental guidelines and rules for everything? Yes, but the Canadian oil and gas industry has led the way on a global basis. We're buying oil from countries that don't have environmental concerns. They also don't have concerns for the rights of women and children. And yet we fund that stuff on a global basis because of our approach. If we were to expand the Canadian oil and gas industry into, its fair and competitive place, which is shipping oil and liquefied natural gas and propane on a global basis, we would reduce the wastes, we would reduce the hypocrisy, we would reduce the impact on women and children of these countries, and we would improve the planet for a much better day. So the idea that we're letting foreign-funded terrorism attack our oil and gas industry in small through the ESG platform, we're making a huge mistake.
Brett Wilson, we're going to return for one final segment after these messages. Please stay with us. And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Brett Wilson. Brett, obviously, there's a lot of talk about resets after the pandemic. Davos and other entities have talked about that. Tell us your kind of point of view on this fad about resets and what it could mean for the Canadian economy.
Well, I'm concerned about this idea that we have to reset on every level. If we could get back to business as it was, in large part. We are a resource-based economy, and so in order to be a resource-based economy, we have to extract, exploit, and ideally develop or refine the resources that we have in our country. And I just somewhat facetiously point out that China's invested in lithium in Canada so that they can then extract lithium for the benefit of China, not anyone else. And so there's some hypocrisy embedded in that. But this great reset, there's a bit of confusion about all of that. The first part of the reset is opening up the economy by relaxing mandates. And strangely, we've got 7 or 8 provinces already there. BC's in lockdown mode, and it's not clear what Atlantic Canada is going to do. But we're opening up. We're still struggling with cross-border. And we're one of the few countries. We have, I think what I saw Air Canada posted the other day, that we may have some of the most regressive rules about travel of any of the 30 countries that Air Canada was referring to. So we've made a mistake at a national level. Have we made mistakes elsewhere? Yeah, Kenny opened up the province of Alberta July of last summer, and he should have said, I'm opening it up unless there's another round of COVID, call it the Omicron issue. Instead, he opened it up and said, we're good to go. And if he just said, I think we're good to go for a while, that would have been the message that was correct. But again, with hindsight, every single province, every single city, and certainly the feds have made mistakes at how we adapt to the COVID challenge. But the great issue right now is national. It's not provincial. Saskatchewan, Alberta opened the door, and Manitoba's followed right behind. By mid-March, we're going to be done with masks. We're going to be done with whatever you want to call your passport. We're going to be done with those protocols, and for most of the country. Right. The question is, can we as a country then be done with it for international travel? I'm still going back and forth across the border regularly, and the hypocrisy and stupidity of some of the testing that has to be done, it's just a revenue source for some testing models. It's got nothing to do with protecting our country.
Are you concerned about Canada's supply chain and its connection to China?
Let me tell you that when I travel Africa, I'm terrified of the future of China and its control of Africa, as an example. the infrastructure it owns there between rails and roads and pipelines and ports of shipping, the marine ports. It's clear that China's intention is to have control for its own benefit. So will China control the shipping channels in terms of what's coming to Canada? Well, we've seen an increase of a five-factor increase of the cost of bringing a single 320 square foot shipping container across the ocean. It's gone up by factor 5 in 2 years. So someone's benefiting from that, and it's costing us. So I'm worried about China as a whole. I think they're respectful, they're intelligent, they're willing to work with people, but ultimately they're looking after their own interests.
Yeah, and I guess we've got less than a minute left here. Do you go on the side of being pessimistic about Canada's economic future or optimistic?
Oh, for sure, I'm optimistic because we're a resource economy. And once we get through, call it the liberal interference with us being a resource economy, we can be, on a global basis, a major competitor, a major contributor, and benefit in return.
Well, I like your sense of optimism. Thanks for ending with that. Brett Wilson, it's been a pleasure to have you on the program. I hope you're not a stranger. Really appreciate your insights today.
Thanks for your time, Tony.
Thank you. Well, a wide-ranging discussion with Brett Wilson there, a lot of insights, obviously his experience as an entrepreneur and an investor, a philanthropist. He knows what he's talking about. Very passionate about the oil and gas sector, but also about Canada's economic future as well. So hope you enjoyed the program, and we'll be back for some other exciting programs in the near future as well. Thanks for watching.